you for being here. I wanted to start saying welcome to sunny Mexico. I guess I was wrong. I gave it my best. In fact, I assured many months ago to Michael McEwen that March in Mexico City is always sunny and pleasant. I was wrong. I've been wrong very many times in my life. It's a pleasure. C'est un plaisir pour moi de vous recevoir ici à la ville du Mexique, de Mexico. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you here to my country, to my city. And if I start in French, it's because this is a North American organization, and we also, have some Quebecois friends here, and it's a pleasure, of course, for us to welcome you here. I have to say that I'm very much a North American citizen in the sense that I was born in Mexico, I was raised in Mexico, and I lived in the States and I've lived in Canada. And let me tell you something about NABA. This is one of the reasons why I'm so proud of being a part of NABA. At a time when some politicians are asking for walls to be built along the borders of Mexico and the States, NABA is exactly the opposite. NABA is trying to build bridges, and this is why I'm so committed to what NABA is trying to do. The government's view of business can be summarized in a few short sentences. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. If it stops moving, subsidize it. Ronald Reagan offered this observation in the 1980s. We in the Mexican broadcast industry have already gone through the two first stages. We have been taxed and overtaxed and then taxed again, more so than most industries in Mexico or in the world. We have also been regulated and regulated again and over-regulated many times over. Let's just hope that this exercise in regulation does not eventually push our industry to a government rescue. We have been profitable and competitive for decades. We have contributed to society through taxes and good corporate behavior. We have also done it through voluntary social programs, such as the dozens that at TV Azteca we have promoted through our Fundación Azteca, or foundation of which I'm a proud member. We don't want to be subsidized. We want to be able to compete freely in the changing environment of today's world. We understand that broadcasting has always been a heavily regulated industry. There are practical reasons for this. The spectrum is limited, and we need a good cop to make sure that our signals don't intrude with each other. Governments, moreover, have always been fearful of the influence of journalists and opinion makers in the population at large. This is why freedom of expression has been restricted by so many authoritarian governments, including Mexico's, throughout most of our history. New regulations have accumulated in Mexico over the past few years. Some are similar to those applied in other countries. We may not like them, but we accept them. Others, however, are being used only in Mexico and are becoming an extraordinary burden for our industry. Broadcasters throughout the world are suffering a change of paradigm. The business is not what it used to be. Traditional over-the-air broadcasting is declining all over the world. Cable and satellite have become the most common ways of conveying television signals in the developed world. In Mexico, as in other poorer countries, a majority of the population continues to receive over-the-air signals, but the trend to other systems of distribution is very clear. You've actually considered this topic in NABA ever since I remember joining the organization, and it's clearly changing the way we do business. We had a meeting yesterday at the board of directors, and part of a large portion, the most important part of our discussion is what exactly is a broadcaster nowadays, and we realize that we have to come to grips with that fact. It's a reality. We're not opposed to that. We just know that we have to change with reality. Other technological changes are threatening over-the-air broadcasting all over the world. The internet is transforming the way people get information and entertainment, and also how they communicate with each other. Digital convergence is erasing the borders among different media. In spite of these changes, broadcasting continues to be much more regulated than other media, especially the internet. And this puts us broadcasters at a distinctive disadvantage. For us in Mexico, the most irritating, the most damaging burden we are suffering is the obligation to carry 3 minutes of unpaid political propaganda for every hour of broadcasting between 6 a.m. and midnight every day. This obligation expands to 4 minutes during political campaigns. Many viewers and radio listeners are so saturated by this avalanche of political propaganda that they're turning off traditional broadcasting. Neither pay TV nor the internet, and surely not newspapers or magazines, which are broadcasting live in the net as well, with video, with audio, is subject to this burden. The must carry and must offer provisions exist in many countries. We accept them, but they also hit Mexican broadcasters badly. Pay TV channels which compete directly with our broadcasts can collect fees from distributors. We have to give away our products for free. Mexican broadcasters underwent a tremendous effort and investment to convert to digital television. In fact, TV Azteca was the only broadcaster that made the conversion 100% and in time. And you know, I mean, you've all had to do the conversion in the States and in Canada. Very few people actually made it on time. We actually did it. We made an effort. It cost us money. We were proud to do it. But even if we were required to make the effort and investment for this transformation, we have not been allowed to take full advantage of the new digital medium. TV Azteca, for example, was a pioneer in multicasting in Mexico as it launched his high TV service in 2009. But the regulators prevented the company from continuing to offer this service. We were told, this is what actually the regulator and the Secretary of Communications at that point told us, that we're too advanced for the country, that the competition was not ready yet to offer the same service, so we were shut down. We actually went to the courts. We managed to win the case, but of course, by the time we managed to win the case, we had lost that competitive advantage of being the first to offer the service to our audience. It was said, how can you offer 3 or 4 channels if your competition isn't prepared yet to do that? Today, multicasting is finally allowed in Mexico, but the regulators continue to take measures to prevent us from a full use of technology. We're not permitted, for example, to offer video on demand, nor to use our spectrum for a return channel. This restricts the value added that we can offer to our clients at a time when other competitors are allowed to take full advantage of their technology. Now, political constraints are also hitting Mexican broadcasters. We are not being just regulated in this arena. Let us be clear, we are being censored. A political reform in 2007 prohibited political parties or candidates from purchasing time from broadcasters. Politicians, however, are still able to purchase spaces in other media. It was a punishment just focusing on the broadcast industry. We're the only ones who are not allowed to take paid political advertising. Everyone else can do it. We just can't do it. Our time was confiscated by the government for the use of political parties in government agencies without indemnification. The problem is that people hate the political propaganda we're compelled to broadcast, and they're turning us off just to get away from the propaganda. And more, they have other options. More and more, they have internet channels. More and more, they have channels that are offered over the pay TV systems that have no obligation to have these 3 minutes or 4 minutes of political propaganda. A version of the fairness doctrine, already considered unconstitutional in the courts of the US, has been approved by Mexican legislators. This right of response legislation would give free television or radio time to anyone who disagrees with the position or information provided by an over-the-air broadcaster. Only the over-the-air broadcaster are submitted to this. The fear to be inundated by opposition or opposing views, some bona fide, some demanded by political groups simply to get free airtime, is likely to have a chilling effect on freedom of expression. Only broadcasters will be submitted to this fairness doctrine. If Sergio Sarmiento questions a political party, if Sergio Sarmiento says that a political party or a political candidate might be proposing something wrong, such as building a bridge to prevent Americans from coming to Mexico, we would not be allowed to say it, because we might get thousands of different points of view that would inundate our programming, and of course would make it impossible for us to continue providing our service. In February, just last month, there was a vote at the Instituto Nacional Electoral, the National Electoral Institute, the INE, to fine and censor TV anchors who on air complained about the legal obligation to introduce political propaganda, interrupting a continuous non-commercial coverage of Pope Francis's visit to Mexico. Every TV network, every radio network, I'm proud to be both a radio commentator and a television commentator, we were providing non-stop coverage of the Pope's visit. Why? Because there was a lot of interest on the part of our audience. We didn't, we basically, or at least on television, there was no commercials because it was considered that this was right for the kind of coverage. But we had to interrupt programming every hour to offer the political party propaganda, and we're compelled to do that by law. And it so happened that a few commentators, a few anchors, made comments to the effect that this was not fair, that people wanted to see the coverage, just as you might have done exactly the same if you'd been compelled to, I know our friends at CBS would agree that you'd been compelled to interrupt the Super Bowl to show political propaganda of Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. Well, our anchors offer, the same kind of reaction that we were getting from the people. How come we get a political propaganda, a political advertisement at a time when I really want, I'm in the middle of listening to the Pope's message. Why should you interrupt your programming for that? Well, the point is that the Instituto Nacional Electoral, the National Electoral Institute, held a vote to consider whether to fine or censor those anchors, those television anchors that had offered the criticism. One of the members of the Institute claimed that such criticism biased people's opinion and turned people against political propaganda. Of course, that's a no-no. He also argued publicly that preserving political propaganda was more important for the country than freedom of expression. A divided vote prevented this act of censorship to take place in this particular case. But the point I want to make is that present legislation in Mexico gives political parties and government agencies precedence over freedom of expression. It seems that we do not have a First Amendment of freedom of expression in Mexico, and that really is something to be very worried. The law also limits individual journalists or broadcasters from endorsing or criticizing candidates or parties. We Mexican journalists have the right to ask people not to vote for Donald Trump. But if Trump were a Mexican candidate, we would be fined or jailed for the same action. A basic right that the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, ABC, CBS, NBC, or Fox have, that of endorsing or criticizing a candidate, is a crime in Mexico. And I've been threatened with jail already. New legislation being considered would give the Instituto Federal de Telecomunicaciones, or telecoms regulator, the power to sanction broadcasters by unilaterally suspending broadcasts without warning if the public lodges complaints about the contents. If someone complains, well, the IFT has the power to, or is trying to come up with regulations that would actually, shut us down while they consider whether the complaint is bona fide or not. And, well, what can I tell you? This, in our opinion, is an extremely dangerous prospect. Presently, Mexican broadcasters are forbidden to show advertising of medical products. The interesting thing is that medical advertising is the lifeline of income for serious national news programs in the US. The telecoms regulator is also considering new rules that would limit other sorts of advertising, for example, integrated product publicity, which would diminish even more the income of broadcasters in Mexico. These and many other limitations to advertising apply only to broadcasters, but not to competing media. If an over-the-air broadcaster in Mexico shows a program in which, God forbid, a female breast happens to be shown uncovered, we are liable for sanctions. Pay TV and the internet have no such restrictions. Well, at least we have earned the right to show male breasts uncovered. In this way, we're doing at least a little better than broadcasters in some Muslim countries. Broadcasting is changing, not only in Mexico, in the entire world. This is a positive and unavoidable trend. But at a time of technological convergence of all media, regulators must be careful not to punish broadcasters so much as to make them financially unviable. We Mexican broadcasters do not want to complete the cycle decried by Ronald Reagan. We don't want to go from being taxed and regulated to being subsidized. Tens of thousands of people are employed in this industry, which has been reasonably profitable, has paid taxes in full and more, has stood brave in tragedies like earthquakes and hurricanes, and was a proud factor of change in the long political process that brought democracy to our country. And believe me, this is something that we haven't had for many decades. This is something relatively new that we have in this country. We don't want any special treatment. We just want to be treated fairly. We want to be allowed to compete in equal conditions at a time when the borders among the media are being erased by technology. Is that too much to ask?